At 61 years old, Sandra Bullock has decided to tell her truth. She no longer needs to please anyone. She no longer has to fake smiles for the cameras. So today, for the very first time, she's going to reveal what really happened behind the scenes. The names you're about to hear will surprise you because not everything in the entertainment industry is as golden as it seems. We're not talking about minor creative differences or temporary misunderstandings. These were experiences that left a deep mark on her, encounters with people that almost made her quit acting for good. If you thought you knew Sandra Bullock, this revelation is going to completely change your perspective on the woman behind Hollywood's most beloved smile. 1. Ryan Reynolds. Yes, you heard that right. Ryan Reynolds, the same actor who is now Hollywood sensation with Deadpool, was one of the toughest experiences of Sandra's career. We're talking about the filming of The Proposal in 2009, a movie that for audiences was a charming romantic comedy, but behind the scenes turned into a nightmare for Sandra. At first, everything seemed perfect. Ryan was young, talented, full of energy, but Sandra soon realized that this energy had a very dark side. Ryan would show up on set with an attitude of superiority that bordered on unbearable. He constantly made comments about Sandra's age, telling her she was too old for the romantic lead, and mocked her acting methods in front of the entire crew. But the worst part wasn't the public comments. It was what happened in private. Ryan began improvising scenes without warning, especially the romantic ones, changing lines to make Sandra look ridiculous. In one scene where they were supposed to kiss, he whispered in her ear, "I hope you know this is just acting, because in real life I'd never be with you." Sandra had to finish the scene professionally, but inside she was falling apart. The breaking point came when Ryan started arriving late to shoots, specifically when Sandra was scheduled to be on set. He did it on purpose, to make her wait, to show who really held the power there. One day, Sandra was left waiting under the Alaskan sun for 4 hours, with the entire crew on hold, simply because Ryan had forgotten to set his alarm. Years later, when The Proposal became a hit, Ryan took all the credit in interviews as if Sandra had only been a supporting piece in his movie. He never once acknowledged the work she had put in to make that comedy work. To the world, they were the perfect on-screen couple, but for Sandra, it marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters of her career. Second, Ryan Gosling. But if you thought Ryan Reynolds was difficult, wait until you hear what happened with Ryan Gosling. Coincidentally, his name is also Ryan. Is it just chance? Sandra doesn't think so. Although they never made a movie together, they almost collaborated on The Big Short before Christian Bale took the role. During the pre-production meetings, Sandra saw the most disturbing side of Gosling's method acting. Ryan would show up to meetings completely immersed in characters that had nothing to do with the film. One day he arrived speaking like a gangster from the 1930s. Another day he acted as if he were an astronaut lost in space. But it wasn't fun or creative, it was genuinely unsettling. In one particularly tense meeting, Gosling walked up to Sandra and said, without breaking character, "Your energy is interfering with my creative process. I need you to leave this room right now." Sandra, confused, thought it was a joke, but Ryan stayed serious, staring at her until she felt so uncomfortable that she actually got up and left. The producers tried to justify his behavior, saying that's just how Ryan worked, that he was intense but brilliant. For Sandra, that was the last straw. She pulled out of the project that same week, but not before telling the director, "If that's what you consider brilliance, I'd rather work with normal actors who know the difference between acting and real life." Years later, when Gosling earned multiple Oscar nominations, Sandra admitted in a private interview, "Talent doesn't justify toxicity, period. third Julia Roberts. Now comes the name no one expects. Julia Roberts. The very same Julia Roberts with the perfect smile. The queen of romantic comedies. The woman who seemed like Sandra's big sister in Hollywood. But the reality was very different. It all started at award shows in the early 2000s. Sandra deeply admired Julia. She saw her as a role model. When they finally met in person at a charity gala, Sandra eagerly approached her to say hello. Julia's response was, "Oh, you're the one trying to copy my career." Sandra thought it was a joke, but Julia continued, "It's funny how all the younger actresses try to do exactly what I did 10 years ago." The comment was so unexpected and cruel that Sandra was left speechless. But the worst part came later. Julia began a silent but effective campaign to sabotage Sandra's opportunities. Whenever there was a major role in a romantic comedy, Julia would call producers and suggest that Sandra didn't have the necessary experience, or that she wasn't reliable enough to carry a film on her own. The lowest point came when Sandra lost the lead role in Eat, Pray, Love. She had spent months working on the character, even traveled to Italy to prepare, investing her time and emotional energy in the project. But Julia used her influence to snatch the role. And the cruelest part was that afterwards she approached Sandra at a party to say, "Don't take it personally, dear. It's just business." For Sandra, it wasn't just business. It was a betrayal by someone she had admired her entire career. From that moment on, Sandra promised herself she would never blindly trust another colleague, no matter how perfect they might seem on the outside. 4. Jesse James. But not every name on this list is an actor. Some were even worse, because they were supposed to love her. Jesse James, her ex-husband, not only broke her heart with his public infidelities, but during their marriage, he sabotaged her career in ways the public never knew. Jesse was jealous of Sandra's success. While she was earning millions and constantly receiving offers, he felt overshadowed. He began subtly boycotting her career, showing up late to important events to embarrass her, making disparaging comments about her movies and interviews, and even going so far as to cancel Sandra's professional commitments without telling her. In 2009, when Sandra was filming The Blind Side, Jesse began his most infamous affair. But what few people know is that during those months, he would constantly call her on set to stir up drama, to distract her, to remind her that she wasn't as special as she thought. There were days when Sandra showed up to set crying, not because of the character she was playing, but because of the constant humiliation she was living through at home. The Blind Side crew knew something was wrong, but Sandra kept her professionalism at the cost of her emotional well-being. When the cheating scandal finally exploded in 2010, right after Sandra won the Oscar for The Blind Side, Jesse cruelly told the press that Sandra was more in love with her career than with her marriage. It was the final stab from a man who had spent 5 years trying to destroy the very career she loved so much. 5. George Clooney. George Clooney has always been seen as Hollywood's gentleman, the actor who helped his colleagues, who joked around but always with kindness. For Sandra, George was something entirely different, a sophisticated manipulator who used his charm to get what he wanted. It all started when both were being considered for roles in Ocean's 11. Sandra was in negotiations for a major part, but George wanted his then girlfriend to land the role. Instead of being direct, George began a subtle smear campaign. At Hollywood parties, George would make funny comments about Sandra that were really disguised criticisms. He'd say things like, "Sandra's great, though sometimes she takes things too seriously," or "She's talented, but she needs to loosen up a little." They sounded harmless, but they planted seeds of doubt in the minds of directors and producers. The cruelest part was that George did it with a smile, as if he were the caring older brother giving advice. It took Sandra years to realize that every piece of advice from George was really calculated sabotage. The breaking point came when Sandra found out, through a careless assistant, that George had been telling the producers of Gravity that she didn't have the physical endurance for the role. Ironically, when Sandra finally landed the role and earned an Oscar nomination for her performance, George was the first to congratulate her publicly, as if he had supported her all along. Since then, Sandra has kept a cordial but distant relationship with George. In her words, "I learned that the most dangerous wolves are the ones dressed as lambs." 6. Harvey Weinstein. And finally, we come to the name that sadly no longer surprises anyone, but for Sandra, it was particularly traumatic. Harvey Weinstein. Sandra's story with Harvey wasn't the same as other actresses, but it was just as destructive. Harvey never tried to physically assault Sandra, but he used his power in equally damaging ways. For years, Harvey controlled which roles Sandra could and couldn't take. He emotionally blackmailed her, telling her that without him, her career would end, that he was the one who had truly made her a star. In private meetings, Harvey would scream at her for hours if she turned down a project he considered important. He insulted her, belittled her, convinced her that without him, she was nothing. Sandra, much younger at the time, believed that was just how the industry worked. The lowest point came when Sandra wanted to produce her own film. Harvey not only refused to fund it, but he also called other studios to make sure no one else supported her. He told her, word for word, "You're an actress, not a producer. Know your place." Those words stayed engraved in Sandra's mind for years. It wasn't until Harvey's scandal came to light that Sandra finally understood she hadn't been crazy, that everything she had endured was part of a systematic pattern of abuse. When Harvey was arrested, Sandra didn't feel satisfaction or revenge. She only felt deep relief knowing she would never again have to see the man who had tried to control her life for so long. Today, at 60 years old, Sandra Bullock looks back without resentment, but with absolute clarity. Each of these experiences shaped her into the strong woman she is today. She no longer tolerates toxic behavior. She no longer allows anyone to make her feel less than she is worth, and most importantly, she no longer stays silent when she sees injustice. Her message to the new generations of actresses is simple but powerful. Your career is important, but your dignity matters more. Never let anyone make you believe you have to endure mistreatment to be successful. Real success comes when you can look in the mirror and be proud of how you got to where you are.